my name is Genevieve Reed. I'm 32, and I live in a small, sun-drenched apartment in the historic heart of Savannah, Georgia. My life is a quiet one, painted in the gentle hues of my work as a grant writer for local arts foundations. I have no husband, no children. My companions are the rustling palm fronds outside my window and the stories I help bring to life with funding proposals. It's a peaceful existence, one I've carefully built for myself. Last month, at my parents' 40th wedding anniversary dinner, the warm, magnolia-scented air of their garden party grew suddenly cold. My sister Stella's voice, sharp and glittering as the champagne flute in her hand, sliced through the evening chatter. "How does it feel to be the least ambitious person at this table, Genevieve? With that quaint little charity job of yours?" Her smile was a masterpiece of condescension. Laughter rippled around the white-clothed table, my father's deep chuckle, my cousin's polite titters, Stella's husband smirking in agreement. The sound was a bonfire, and every sacrifice I had ever made for them was the kindling. Years of being the quiet, reliable foundation they all stood upon, yet never truly saw, flashed before my eyes. The old Genevieve would have shrunk. She would have offered a tight, pained smile and let the moment pass, another small cut added to 1,000 others. But as the laughter washed over me, something deep inside, something worn thin from years of thankless giving, finally snapped. I leaned forward, the candlelight flickering in my eyes, and met her gaze. "How will it feel?" I asked, my voice not loud, but carrying a weight that silenced the table, "when the least ambitious one stops funding your ambitions?" The world seemed to hold its breath. Stella's smirk faltered, her eyes widening in a way I had never seen before. The laughter died, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence. "What?" she stammered, the single word a fragile crack in the frozen tableau. I didn't wait for her to piece it back together. I stood, the legs of my chair scraping against the stone patio with a final, screeching sound of protest. I walked away from the table, from their shocked faces etched in the twilight, and out of the garden gate. For too long, I had carried their world on my shoulders, only to be mocked for the strength it required. That night, I decided they would finally learn the true cost of my support and the profound emptiness of its absence. I was 15 when I first understood that in my family, love was a currency, and I was expected to be the mint. Growing up in our sprawling, slightly faded Victorian home in Savannah, I learned that my role was to be the quiet anchor in the beautifully chaotic storm that was my family. My sister, Stella, 2 years older, was the wind, dazzling, captivating, and always at the center of everything. She was the one with the grand dreams and the effortless charm our parents celebrated. I was just Genevieve, the steady one, the girl who read books in the window seat and didn't cause a fuss. But steadiness doesn't pay the mortgage. I was 14 when I got my first job, shelving books at a dusty old bookshop on Bull Street. The air smelled of aging paper and lemon polish, a scent that for years I would associate with the quiet accumulation of responsibility. Every dollar I earned went into a savings account, a secret hoard against the instability I could feel humming just beneath the surface of our lives. That winter, my father's architectural firm lost a major client. I overheard my mother's hushed, worried whispers on the phone about making the next mortgage payment. Stella was a senior in high school, consumed with prom committees and college applications, blissfully unaware of the tightening knot of fear in our home. I wasn't. I withdrew my savings, $800 scraped together from a year of careful work, and placed the envelope on my father's desk. "You don't have to do this, sweetie," my mother had said, her hand on my arm, her voice strained. But her eyes were relieved. My father took the money with a gruff nod. "You're a good girl, Genevieve. Reliable." The mortgage was paid, but my contribution was never mentioned again. A month later, Stella got a new convertible for her 18th birthday, a gleaming cherry red surprise that she paraded all over town. By 17, it was a pattern. My father needed a new set of expensive drafting tools. I handed over $500 from my summer job at a coffee shop. He patted my head, the same gesture he used for the family dog, and called me his little nest egg. My mother would smile that same weary, grateful smile. Stella, meanwhile, was accepted into a prestigious and ruinously expensive design school in New York, a triumph the whole family celebrated with a lavish dinner I helped pay for. At 19, my own dream felt within reach. I'd been awarded a significant scholarship to study art history in Florence, a chance to immerse myself in the world I'd only read about in the dusty tomes at the bookshop. I imagined the light over the Arno, the scent of old canvas and oil paint, a life that was finally my own. But then Stella called home, a whirlwind of tears and panic. Her tuition payment was late, and she was thousands of dollars in debt from living a life in Manhattan that far outstripped her part-time gallery job. My father sat me down in his study, the air thick with unspoken expectations. "Family helps family, Genevieve," he said, his gaze heavy. "Stella needs us." I knew what he meant. He didn't have the funds. I did. I let the scholarship deadline pass. My dream of Florence dissolved like a watercolor in the rain. I stayed in Savannah, enrolling in the local university. The $5,000 I had saved for Italy, my entire future, went to Stella's student debt. She graduated with honors and a portfolio that launched her career, never once saying thank you. She'd sweep into town for holidays, full of stories about gallery openings and glamorous parties, while I was balancing night classes with 2 jobs to pay for my own, much cheaper education. My mother would pat my shoulder, her touch light as a falling leaf. "You have such a good heart, Genevieve." My father would just nod, as if my sacrifice was simply the natural order of things. They leaned on me so heavily they forgot I was even there. To them, I wasn't the daughter with dreams. I was the emergency fund, the fixer of problems they preferred to ignore. When Stella married at 26, I paid for the deposit on her reception at a historic Savannah inn. When she wanted to open her own boutique, the Gilded Fern, I quietly co-signed the business loan they wouldn't have given her on her own. When their eldest son needed braces, a bill they complained about endlessly, I loaned them the money I knew I'd never see again. Those years forged me. I learned about ledgers and interest rates, about how to stretch a dollar and balance a budget. By my late 20s, I'd turned that grim education into a career, finding a niche as a grant writer. I had a gift for it, for weaving narratives that convinced foundations to invest in art, in music, in the soul of our city. My income was steady, comfortable, but a significant portion of it was still siphoned off to prop up my family's carefully curated image of success. Looking back, I don't know why I let it go on for so long. Perhaps I was starved for their approval, believing that one day, my quiet contributions would finally be seen and valued. But every time Stella would laugh at a family dinner, showing off a new designer handbag while I knew her credit cards were maxed out, a little piece of me withered. They saw her glittering facade, her perfect children, her beautiful life. I was just Genevieve, the quiet, responsible one in the background. The one who paid for the polish. That night at the anniversary dinner, when Stella's words hit their mark, it wasn't just an insult. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being rendered invisible. I wasn't the quiet girl anymore. I was a woman who had finally been pushed too far. I had given them everything, and they had taken it all without a second glance. What was coming next wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. A week before the anniversary dinner, the humid Savannah air hung thick and heavy in my apartment. I was hunched over my laptop, immersed in a grant proposal for a children's theater program, when my phone buzzed. Stella's name flashed on the screen. A call from her at 10:30 on a Tuesday night was never good news. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and answered. "Genevieve, darling, I need a favor," she began, her voice a silken blend of familiarity and entitlement. "The Gilded Fern is doing so well, it's just bursting at the seams. I have an opportunity to expand into the space next door, but I need to secure a bigger line of credit. The bank wants a cosigner on a $75,000 loan. You're so good with all that financial stuff, you can make it happen, right?" Her tone was breezy, as if she were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. She hadn't asked how I was, hadn't bothered with any pretense of a real conversation. My fingers tightened around my phone. $75,000 is a lot of money, Stella, I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Why this? Why now?" She let out a short, impatient laugh. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Genevieve. You sit in your little apartment all day writing those feel-good essays. It's not like you're curing cancer. Just sign the papers. It's for the family, after all. A rising tide lifts all boats, you know. Her words were a casual dismissal of my entire career, of the years I'd spent honing my craft, of the genuine passion I had for my work. To her, it was a trivial hobby. I had secured millions of dollars for the city's cultural institutions, but in her eyes, I was still just the little sister playing with words. I can't do that, Stella, I said, my voice firm. I won't co-sign that loan. There was a beat of stunned silence, then the silkiness in her voice curdled into ice. You're so selfish, Genevieve. You always have been. Hiding away your money, acting like you're better than the rest of us just because you don't have a family or a real business to run. The accusation wasn't new, but this time it landed on raw, exposed nerves. I was the one who had propped up her real business, who had paid for the private school her children attended, who had ensured our parents never missed a mortgage payment. Selfish. I shot back, my own control fraying. You have no idea what I've done for this family, Stella. Not a clue. The history was a scream in my throat, a litany of every check I'd written, every dream I'd deferred. But I swallowed it down. Not yet. What is that supposed to mean? She snapped. You're always so cryptic, so holier-than-thou. You know what? Forget it. I don't need you. I'll find another way, I always do. Her voice was dripping with a venomous pride, each word meant to diminish me, to put me back in my place. She hung up before I could say another word. I stood in the quiet of my apartment, the deadline humming in my ear, my hand trembling. Selfish. Better than us. Useless. Her words swirled in my mind, each one a spark on the dry tinder of 2 decades of resentment. I had always absorbed her barbs, telling myself they didn't matter, that she didn't mean it. But this time was different. This wasn't just about money. It was about her innate belief that my life, my work, and my resources were hers for the taking. She thought she could belittle my career and demand my financial backing in the same breath, and I would simply acquiesce as I always had. She was wrong. I sat down at my laptop, but I didn't return to the grant proposal. Instead, I opened a locked file on my hard drive. It contained years of meticulously scanned documents and spreadsheets, bank transfers to Stella, receipts for her children's tuition, the original loan agreement for her boutique. A contract she had signed in a moment of desperation years ago and had long since forgotten. Every number, every signature, was a piece of my life I had quietly given away. Stella thought my job was quaint. She had no idea that the skills I used to write grant proposals were the same skills I had used to save her from financial ruin. The numbers on the screen told a story she had refused to read. They showed how much I had carried, how much I had concealed. I leaned back in my chair, my mind clear and sharp. The anniversary dinner was in 1 week. Stella would be there, holding court, the perfect daughter, while I was expected to be the silent, admiring satellite. But I wasn't going to that dinner to play my part. I was going to rewrite the script. I opened my online banking app, checking the balances on my investment accounts. I was more than prepared. Stella's words had lit a match. And at that dinner, I would finally let the whole rotten structure burn. The evening of my parents' anniversary dinner, I walked through the iron gate into their garden, my stomach a tight knot of resolve. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the low hum of conversation. My cousins, my aunt and uncle, Stella's husband, and a few of my parents' oldest friends were gathered around the long, beautifully set table. Stella was the star of the show, her laughter ringing out as she recounted a story about a celebrity who had visited her boutique. My father watched her with a look of unwavering pride. My mother moved around the table, a gentle ghost in a linen dress, her smile soft but stretched thin. I took my assigned seat, my hands folded in my lap, my pulse a steady drumbeat, waiting for the moment I knew would come. Stella's gaze eventually landed on me, a sly, pitying smile playing on her lips. How does it feel to be the least ambitious person at this table, Genevieve? With that quaint little charity job of yours? The question, tossed off so casually, landed like a stone in a quiet pond. The ripples of laughter followed immediately. My father's deep chuckle, my cousin's nervous giggles, her husband's smug grin. My mother looked down at the plate she was holding, her own smile faltering. The sting of it was familiar, a dull ache I had carried for years. But tonight, it wasn't a wound. It was fuel. The old Genevieve would have absorbed the blow in silence. But she was gone. I leaned forward, my eyes locking with Stella's across the flickering candlelight. "How will it feel?" I asked, my voice steady and clear, a blade wrapped in velvet, when the least ambitious one stops funding your ambitions. The laughter choked and died. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Stella's smile evaporated, her face going slack with shock. A heavy, profound silence fell over the garden, broken only by the chirping of crickets. What are you talking about?" Stella stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. She glanced at her husband for support, but he was staring at me, his smugness replaced by confusion. "Let's be clear," I said, standing slowly, deliberately. The sound of my chair scraping against the stone was unnervingly loud in the stillness. "The loan for the Gilded Fern that you defaulted on in 2015. The quarterly payments for your son's tuition at Chatham Academy, which total over $30,000 to date. The monthly loans to cover your store's payroll that you never pay back. I have been holding this family's finances together, Stella, while you stand here and mock the very job that makes it all possible." My father's jaw tightened, his hand clenching around his wine glass. "Genevieve, that's enough," he said, his voice a low growl of command. But I had just begun. "No, Dad, it's not," I said, turning my gaze to him. "It's never been enough for you, has it?" As long as Stella was shining, it didn't matter who was polishing the silver. I looked at my mother, whose eyes were wide and shimmering with unshed tears, her hands frozen on the back of a chair. "You knew, Mom. You both knew. And you let it happen. You let me carry it all." Stella's face was a blotchy, furious red. "You're lying," she spat, her voice cracking. "You're making this all up to ruin tonight, to make yourself feel important." A cold, sad smile touched my lips. "Check your accounts, Stella. Check the wire transfers from my bank. Check the loan documents you signed when your boutique was about to go under. I'm done. I'm done carrying you. I'm done carrying all of you." My gaze swept across the table, meeting every pair of stunned eyes, my father's fury, my mother's silent tears, my cousin's awkward horror. They had taken my money, my time, my dreams, and repaid me with condescension. Stella tried to laugh, a desperate, brittle sound. "You're pathetic, Genevieve." Throwing a temper tantrum like a child. "Pathetic?" I echoed, my voice soft again, but piercing. "I'm the one who kept your dream alive. And now, I'm done." I turned and walked toward the gate, my own heart hammering against my ribs, but my steps were firm. "You can't just walk out on us." Stella called after me, her voice shrill with panic. I didn't look back. The latch of the garden gate clicked shut behind me, a sound of profound finality. They had built their perfect world on a foundation they never bothered to inspect. Now they were about to discover just how fragile it truly was. 3 days after the disastrous dinner, I sat at the teak desk in my apartment, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. I had made a decision. No more quiet infusions of cash. For years, I had a recurring transfer set up, $2,500 on the first of every month, sent from my savings to the business account for the Gilded Fern. It was the money that covered her rent and utilities when sales were slow, a safety net she didn't even know existed. I logged into my online banking portal, navigated to the transfers page, and with a steady hand, I clicked delete. A small pop-up asked if I was sure. I clicked confirm. My heart gave a single, hard thump, a feeling not of malice, but of liberation. The fallout was immediate. By the next evening, my phone was alight with frantic texts from Stella. Landlord called. Rent check bounced. What's going on? I ignored them. The following morning, my voicemail was full. Stella's voice, first annoyed, then panicked, then furious, demanding I call her back and fix this. Then the sharp, insistent buzz of my apartment's intercom. I pressed the talk button. Stella's voice, tight with anger, crackled through the speaker. "Genevieve, open this door. Now." My father's gruff voice was in the background, telling her to calm down. I buzzed them in, bracing myself. The door swung open to reveal Stella, her face flushed and her eyes wild, and my father, his expression a mask of stern disapproval. They stepped into my living room without an invitation. "You cut me off?" Stella accused, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "The boutique is a mess. My suppliers are calling, my landlord is threatening eviction. You have to fix this, Genevieve." I remained leaning against my kitchen counter, my own arms folded. "Fix it," I repeated, my voice calm. "I've been fixing your messes since we were teenagers, Stella. I'm done." My father stepped forward, his presence filling my small apartment. "Genevieve, this is not a game. Your sister's livelihood is at stake. You have the means. You will reinstate the payment." It wasn't a request, it was a command, rooted in a lifetime of quiet expectation. A short, bitter laugh escaped me. "You have no idea what's at stake, Dad." I walked to my desk, retrieved a slim leather portfolio, and dropped it onto the coffee table between them. "Look at this." Stella eyed the portfolio with suspicion before snatching it up. She unzipped it and pulled out a sheaf of papers. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion as she scanned them. Bank statements. Legal contracts. A notarized document of incorporation. My father leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowed. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. "That," I said, pointing to the final document, "is a stock ownership agreement. It proves that I am the majority shareholder of the Gilded Fern, LLC. I own 51% of your store, Stella." Her face went ashen, the papers trembling in her hand. That's not possible," she stammered. "You never said." "You were on the verge of bankruptcy in 2015, I continued, my voice cold and factual. "Creditors were about to seize your inventory. You were crying on the phone to me every night. So I stepped in. I liquidated my own investment portfolio and injected $60,000 of my personal savings into your business. In exchange for saving it from collapse, you signed over controlling interest. You were so desperate you barely read the papers. But you signed them." My father stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Genevieve, you don't throw something like this in your sister's face," he said, his voice rising. "We're family. You help family without keeping score." "Family?" I countered, my voice sharp. "Family doesn't mock the person who is secretly keeping them afloat. Family doesn't call you useless one day and demand $75,000 the next." I turned back to Stella. "I am not reinstating the payment. I am done bailing you out. Your business is now your responsibility." Her eyes flashed with a desperate fury. "You're pathetic, Genevieve," she spat, clutching the documents. "Holding this over my head. You hide in this little apartment with your little grants while I built something real." "Real?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Your real business would have been a footnote in the county's bankruptcy filings 7 years ago if it weren't for me. Those papers prove it. And as the majority shareholder, I could call a board meeting tomorrow and vote to dissolve the entire company. Good luck building something real then." My father held up a hand. "Enough, Genevieve. You're tearing this family apart." "No, Dad," I said, my gaze unwavering. "I've been holding it together." And my resignation was long overdue. The room fell into a heavy silence, the undeniable truth of the documents lying between them. Stella stood, clutching the portfolio, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. My father took her by the arm. "We're leaving," he muttered. They walked out, the door closing with a soft click behind them, leaving me alone in the sudden quiet. My heart was pounding, a wild bird in my chest, but my resolve had solidified into something as hard and clear as diamond. I had shown them the truth. And I was far from finished. 5 days after I revealed my ownership of the Gilded Fern, I drove to my parents' house. The silence from my family had been absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket of denial. They hadn't called, hadn't texted. It was clear they hoped that if they ignored the truth, it would simply go away. But I wasn't going to let it. They needed to understand the depth of my involvement, the reality of the sacrifices they had so casually overlooked. I clutched the same leather portfolio, my knuckles white, and knocked on the familiar front door. My mother opened it, her face pale and drawn. She avoided my eyes. "Genevieve," she said softly, stepping back to let me in. The living room felt like a courtroom. Stella was on the sofa, her arms crossed, a thunderous expression on her face. My father stood by the fireplace, his back rigid. The air was so thick with unspoken accusations you could taste it. I sat in the armchair opposite them and placed the portfolio on the coffee table. "I'm here because you need to understand what actually happened," I began, my voice even. In 2015, Stella's business wasn't just struggling. It was dead. I didn't just write a check for $60,000. I spent weeks on the phone with her suppliers, negotiating payment plans. I met with her landlord to prevent an eviction. I spent my nights poring over her books, untangling the mess she had made. I risked my own financial future to save her dream. That is how I became the majority owner. It wasn't a trick. It was a rescue. Stella's eyes narrowed. "You keep saying that," she snapped. "You're just trying to humiliate me. You could have been discreet. You didn't have to blow everything up at the dinner or ambush us in your apartment. You're making this all about you. Making it about me?" My voice rose, tinged with years of frustration. "Stella, I kept your dream alive while you called me unambitious. I paid for your children to have the best education while you laughed at my quaint job. All I am asking for right now is for you to acknowledge it. For you to say, 'Thank you, Genevieve. You were right.'" My father finally turned from the fireplace, his face a stony mask. "You are making this infinitely worse, Genevieve. You are dragging this family through the mud out of some misguided need to be right." "Need to be right?" I shot back, turning on him. "Dad, this isn't about being right. This is about being seen. When Stella's business was failing, I was the one who stepped up. Not you. I did it because I thought it mattered. I thought I mattered to this family." I opened the portfolio, spreading the documents on the table. The signed contract. The bank records showing the liquidation of my stocks and the transfer to the boutique's account. Emails from 2015, time-stamped late at night, where I was pleading with creditors on Stella's behalf. My mother reached for the papers, her hands trembling. She read through a few of the emails, her eyes filling with tears. But she said nothing. Stella refused to even look, her gaze fixed stubbornly on the wall. "You don't get it," Stella said, her voice shaking with rage. "You're not the hero in this story, Genevieve. You're the villain. You're the one breaking this family apart because you couldn't handle a joke." I stood up, my hands clenched at my sides. "Breaking the family?" "Stella, I was the glue holding it together. I gave up my trip to Florence, I gave up my savings, I gave up my time. All I wanted was a little bit of respect. Just an acknowledgement of the truth." My mother finally spoke, her voice a fragile whisper. "We didn't know the extent of it, Genevieve. Why didn't you ever tell us?" Her question, meant to be conciliatory, felt like another betrayal. "I shouldn't have had to, Mom," I said, my throat tight. "You should have seen. You all should have." I looked at my father, whose silence was more damning than any of Stella's accusations. "Dad, you stood by and let her belittle me for years. Say something." He just shook his head, his voice gruff. "You've made your point, Genevieve. You're tearing us apart." His words were the final blow. I calmly gathered my documents, my hands steady despite the profound ache in my chest. "I came here for the truth," I said, looking at each of their faces. "If you can't handle it, that's on you." I walked to the door, their collective silence a heavy weight on my back. I had laid the truth at their feet, every dollar, every sleepless night, every quiet sacrifice. If they refused to see it, I would have to make them feel it. This was not over. For days after the failed family summit, I was trying to lose myself in a new grant proposal when my phone rang. It was Stella. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text appeared. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to ruin me." I didn't reply. The next day, the calls started. First from Stella again, her voice cold and clipped on the voicemail she left. "I'm done with your games, Genevieve. I want to buy you out. Name your price for the shares, and let's be done with this." Before I could even process that, my phone rang again. This time it was my father. "Genevieve," he began, his voice heavy with paternal disappointment. "Your mother is a wreck. This fight over the boutique, it's destroying her. Your sister made you an offer. Sell her the shares. It's the only way to put this family back together. I closed my eyes, the familiar weight of their expectations pressing down on me. Dad, I saved that store. I poured $60,000 and months of my life into it. Those shares are the only acknowledgement I have for what I did. I'm not selling. You're being stubborn, he said, frustration coloring his tone. Think about your mother. Think about the family. Is holding onto this piece of paper worth all this pain? For a fleeting moment, I wavered. Selling the shares would be the easy way out. It would mean an end to the phone calls, the accusations, the crushing weight of their disapproval. I could take the money, walk away, and sever the ties that had become so toxic. Then I looked at the leather portfolio on my desk. The contract, signed and notarized, stared back at me. I remembered the anxiety of those weeks in 2015, checking my bank account, hoping I'd made the right decision, all while Stella was oblivious, taking credit for a recovery she hadn't engineered. Selling those shares felt like invalidating my own sacrifice. It felt like agreeing with them that my contribution was just a financial transaction, easily erased. That I was, in the end, the one who was wrong. I called Stella back. I got your message, I said, my voice firm. The answer is no. I'm not selling. You can't do that, she sputtered. It's my store. You're holding it hostage to feed your ego. I'm not holding it hostage, Stella. I'm a partner. A silent partner you chose to forget you had. If you want to run the business, you'll have to do it with me as the majority owner. We can discuss a plan for profitability, but I am not walking away. A partner. She laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. You're a parasite, Genevieve. This isn't over. You'll regret this. She hung up. I immediately texted my father. I'm not selling the shares. I earned them. This is not up for debate. His reply came minutes later. You're choosing a business over your family. I don't know who you are anymore. I set my phone down, my hands trembling slightly. I had made my choice. I wasn't just keeping the shares. I was keeping my self-respect. They had drawn their line in the sand, choosing Stella's narrative over the undeniable truth. And I had drawn mine. The 51% stake wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my story, my proof, my power. And I would fight to keep it, no matter what it cost me. The lawsuit arrived 2 weeks later. It was delivered by a courier, a thick, intimidating manila envelope that I accepted with a steady hand. Inside, couched in cold, formal legalese, was a complaint filed on behalf of Stella Reed and the Gilded Fern, LLC. It accused me of undue influence and breach of fiduciary duty, claiming I had taken advantage of my sister's emotional distress in 2015 to coerce her into an unconscionable contract. It demanded I surrender my shares immediately or face them in court. My heart hammered against my ribs, but a strange sense of calm settled over me. This was it. The final, desperate move of a person who refused to accept reality. I couldn't face this alone. I called a friend, Laura, who worked at a large law firm downtown. She listened patiently to my story and gave me a name. Margaret Shaw, she said. She's sharp, she's tough, and she does not suffer fools. She's exactly who you need. The next morning, I sat in Margaret Shaw's clean, modern office, the Savannah skyline visible through a large picture window. I laid out the lawsuit and my leather portfolio of documents on her glass desk. Margaret, a woman with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense air, reviewed everything in silence. She read the complaint, then meticulously went through my contract, my bank records, and the chain of emails from 2015. After a long 10 minutes, she looked up at me. This is a bluff, she said, her voice crisp. A classic intimidation tactic. Their claim of undue influence is incredibly weak. You have a signed, notarized contract, and more importantly, you have a mountain of evidence showing you acted in good faith to save the business. You have the canceled checks, the emails to creditors. They don't have a case. So, what do we do? I asked, a knot of tension in my chest beginning to loosen. We fight back, Margaret said, leaning forward. We'll file a motion to dismiss based on the evidence. We will make it very clear that if they proceed, we will countersue for legal fees. This will get expensive and ugly for them very quickly. The question is, are you prepared for that, Genevieve? This is your family. I met her gaze without flinching. They stopped being my family the moment they decided their comfort was more important than the truth, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I'm ready. Over the next 6 weeks, the battle played out through a series of terse legal letters. Stella's lawyer, likely fueled by my father's money, refused to back down. They rejected our motion to dismiss, and we found ourselves in a sterile courtroom in the Chatham County Courthouse for a preliminary hearing. I sat beside Margaret, my posture straight, my hands resting on my pristine file of evidence. Across the room, Stella sat with her husband and my father. She wouldn't look at me. My father's glare was a physical weight. My mother was conspicuously absent. Stella's lawyer argued passionately, painting a picture of a vulnerable, struggling artist taken advantage of by her calculating, financially savvy sister. Then it was Margaret's turn. She didn't raise her voice. She simply and methodically presented the facts. The $60,000 transfer. The emails proving I had negotiated with suppliers. The notarized contract Stella had signed. Your Honor, she concluded, this wasn't coercion. This was a lifeline. My client made a legitimate, high-risk investment to save her sister's business, an investment for which she has received nothing but ingratitude and baseless accusations. The judge, a stern, older woman, looked over her glasses at Stella's lawyer. Do you have any actual evidence to refute this contract or these financial records? He stammered, well, no, Your Honor, but the nature of the relationship. The judge cut him off with a wave of her hand. The nature of the relationship is irrelevant in the face of a legally binding contract. The plaintiff's claims are without merit. Motion to dismiss is granted. She banged her gavel once. It was over. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. I had won. From across the room, I saw Stella's face crumble. My father put a protective arm around her and guided her out of the courtroom, not once looking in my direction. Outside on the courthouse steps, Margaret shook my hand. Congratulations, Genevieve. Your shares are secure. They can't touch you on this again. Thank you, Margaret, I said, my voice thick. For everything. Walking back to my car under the shade of the live oaks, I felt a deep, aching void where my family used to be. The lawsuit had cost me thousands of dollars and weeks of sleepless nights. It had severed the final, frayed thread connecting me to them. But as I drove home, I also felt something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. A quiet, unshakable sense of my own worth. I hadn't just won a legal battle. I had taken back my own story. I was alone, but for the first time, I was truly free. For months after the judge's gavel fell, the humid Savannah summer began to soften into a golden autumn. The silence from my family was absolute, a clean, sharp break. The gilded fern, I heard through the grapevine, was struggling. Without my monthly subsidy and with a mountain of legal fees to pay, Stella was being forced to face the reality of her own business acumen, or lack thereof. The space where my family used to be in my life was no longer an aching void. It was becoming a garden. Freed from the constant drain of their needs and their drama, I had energy I didn't know I possessed. I poured it into my work at the foundation, securing a major grant for a public arts project that would bring murals to underserved neighborhoods. The work felt meaningful, tangible, a stark contrast to the invisible labor of propping up Stella's boutique. I started taking long walks through the city's squares at dusk, reacquainting myself with the gentle beauty of my chosen home. I bought an easel and a set of oil paints, and I began to paint again, a passion I had abandoned in college to make more time for the part-time jobs that funded my family. My first few canvases were clumsy, but with each stroke of color, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my own soul. Then, an email arrived that would change the trajectory of my new life. It was from a colleague at a partner organization, inviting me to speak at a regional women's leadership conference. The theme was resilience. They wanted me to share my story, not the legal specifics, but the personal journey of setting boundaries and redefining self-worth. My first instinct was to say no. The thought of standing on a stage and laying bare the most painful chapter of my life was terrifying. But then I thought of all the years I had remained silent, all the times I had allowed my story to be overwritten by others. Maybe speaking it aloud was the final act of reclamation. I said yes. I spent weeks crafting my speech, not as a tale of bitterness or revenge, but as a story of quiet awakening. The day of the conference, I stood at the podium, my heart pounding, looking out at a sea of faces. I began to speak. For most of my life, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, I believed my value was measured by my capacity to give. I was the fixer, the safety net, the quiet benefactor. I gave until there was almost nothing left of me. But the greatest act of giving I ever performed was not to my family. It was the day I finally gave myself permission to say no. That no cost me my family. But it gave me back myself. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then the room erupted in applause. It was overwhelming, but the true impact came afterward. One by one, women approached me, their eyes shining with recognition. A woman who had walked away from a toxic marriage. A daughter struggling to set boundaries with her aging parents. An entrepreneur who felt suffocated by her family's expectations. My story, I realized, was not just my own. That day was a turning point. The lawsuit had been a victory of law. This was a victory of the spirit. It had cost me my family, yes, but it had given me a community. I kept painting. I kept walking. I kept writing. I was invited to speak at another conference, and then another. My life, once so small and insular, was expanding in ways I had never imagined. My family remained a distant silence. I heard my father had retired. My mother sent a single, tentative text on my birthday, thinking of you. I miss my girl. I read the words, felt a pang of the old sorrow, and then I put the phone down without replying. Not out of anger, but out of a deep, settled clarity. I could not be their girl anymore. I had to be my own woman. One evening, walking home as the sky over the Savannah River burned with a brilliant, fiery sunset, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost startling. The family I had fought so hard to hold together was a memory. But I was not broken. I was, for the first time, completely and utterly whole. My life was no longer about saving others from the consequences of their choices. It was about building a life of my own. And that, I realized, was the most ambitious thing I could ever do.